So I remember the day that I told this client, you're dealing with PTSD. And she was 50 something years old. She had had a family member die when she was really young. And when I went through the situation, like what PTSD looks like, she was like, I only thought that was for the Vietnam vet who, when I was a little kid, talked to the trees and walked, would get lost and walk in the neighborhood and they'd have to return him to his home. And
what's wrong with talking to trees? So, I mean, I think that story illustrates that the short answer is no, it's not. But I think it's more complicated than that. And we recently were at a conference listening to Bessel van der Kolk, and he was talking about
developmental trauma is one of the
developmental trauma is one, but also he was on the board with Dr. Frank Ochberg when they developed and defined what PTSD was, and he kind of indicated pretty directly that that the intention was for military trauma, and
yes.
In fact, he was working for, I think, the VA at the time. That's why he was there.
Somebody posted something about trauma and saying something about, those of us with real trauma, I'm going to botch the quote, but basically it was those of us with real trauma are tired of hearing about everybody's trauma, that this happened to you or this happened to you. And I can understand that. Like a veteran who has some serious trauma. I mean, he watched his buddy die, or someone who watches their child die. I mean, there are absolute levels of trauma. But as one of our podcast guests said, you are a first responder to your trauma, to your situation. You are experiencing what's happening in the way that you filter that. And it is for you. I mean, for a child whose parents get divorced, the two people that love them more than anything in the world, and the only thing they know when they're first born, now can't stand each other and don't speak to each other. That's traumatic.
It is, yeah.
And so now you take that times so many other things.
Well, especially the developmental traumas accumulate so much over time, and they're so subtle that we don't realize them. Whereas it's very easy to know when someone goes to war and sees their friend get killed, or they get blown up in a Humvee, or whatever the case may be. That is right. That's, I think, for most people watching this, can agree that that's an easy.
And they can have survivor's guilt, and they have
and all the things that go along with that. But it's so much more subtle, and I think often inhibiting for the person, like you're saying, who their parents divorced when they're 3 or 4 years old, and they see their parents arguing,
and then their teacher, in second grade, their teacher's mom dies, and all of a sudden the teacher leaves and isn't there for 6 months, and that happens to be, things like that seem so minimal can be a really big deal, especially when that person was a stable adult in that child's life, and all of a sudden they're gone. And we don't often explain that to kids or even account for that. We're like, oh, we're sorry, but the new teacher's really nice. But that can be really traumatic.
Totally, and those things are so hard to pick up on. I mean, we have techniques that we use to help identify some of those things. But I think for people out there watching this, the important takeaway is, one, it's not just for PTSD is not just for the military.
And trauma is different to experiencing a reaction from a trauma. It can be different than PTSD.
So I think at the end of the day, don't compare your traumas. Your traumas are your traumas, and they're individual to you. And even people who experience the same event experience their trauma in different ways. And so
it's okay. We shouldn't judge. It was bad. It was tough. And when you look at, we're filtering everybody's reactions to us as little kids all the way through adults. And
that's, I think, what we talk about when we talk about developmental trauma is that just stuff that those filters you acquire over your lifetime that are now causing you relationship problems and job problems and all these other things. So if you're experiencing some of these things, which it doesn't necessarily mean you have PTSD, just means that you got some things you have to clear.
To me, the moment you're having a day where you think, gosh, this is just really tough, I just can't get past this, or I'm stuck on this, or I keep getting distracted from work and trying to find other things I can accomplish, it may be because there's something that's unresolved in your life. Go see a counselor. I mean, to me, that's the time to go. Yeah. Not when all of a sudden your whole family looks at you and goes, why have you checked out?
Yeah. Or you need help.
You're right, you need help. Yeah.